Good afternoon. I'm Eric Lenask from TMC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all and to kick off today's webinar, which is called 5 Questions About Cloud Communication Security That You're Not Asking. Well, to start off, I don't think I have to spend a whole lot of time explaining why we're talking about this topic, why security is a topic that every business needs to understand. I mean, let's face it, it feels like every day we're reading about and hearing about new breaches, some of them small, some of them massively huge, but all of them putting businesses, providers, customers at risk. Cyber attacks are only going to grow, and hackers are going to continue to look for and find new points of entry into corporate networks. It's a truly unfortunate reality today, and it means that security has to be at the top of the list of priorities for every business, making sure that all of their IT and services, anything that can be used to gain access to your information, is protected. So what does that mean as businesses look to increasingly move to the cloud for all of their business needs? And that includes communications. I mean, if you think back to when cloud first became a buzzword, security was one of the big question marks, largely, I think, due to a lack of understanding, really. And despite the benefits like simplified deployment and management, scalability, cost, mobility, that all can lead to increased productivity, the easy upgrades to the latest features, and so many other things, businesses were reasonably concerned. The good news is that since then, we know cloud has evolved and has proven to be as secure as traditional solutions. Some would even argue that cloud can be even more secure. It's the increased understanding and the trust that's been a major factor in why we've seen such tremendous growth in cloud. It doesn't mean, though, that all cloud solutions are equal. They aren't when it comes to their features and capabilities, and they aren't necessarily when it comes to security. So security needs to still be at the top of the list of priorities. Just as you as business leaders consider features and costs and functionality and all sorts of other factors when choosing the cloud communication solutions, you should also be asking questions about security. Some will argue that security is actually just table stakes if you're offering services in the cloud. But the fact is, providers take different approaches. They have different strategies and theories on how they do it. So what should you really expect from your cloud provider? What are those questions that you should be asking to make sure that your business isn't going to be put at risk and that you're comfortable with the security policies and strategies? The fact is, all the benefits of cloud communications combined aren't going to be enough to outweigh exposing your business. And those are some of the topics that Patrick Oborn and Pedro Luna are here to talk about today. When you're in the market for new communication solutions, what are the important considerations and questions to ask? Patrick is co-founder of Master Agent Telarus, and Pedro is Senior Product Line Manager for MyCloud Connect at Mitel. And before I hand today's session over to them, just 2 quick programming notes. First, you should all have an interface on your screens. If you have any questions that come up during their presentation, feel free to submit those. We'd love to get to them and answer them at the end of the session. And if you have any additional questions, follow-up, or need more information after today's event, you'll all be getting follow-up emails with contact information as well as details on accessing the on-demand version of today's event. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce Patrick Oborn. Patrick.
Thank you so much, Eric. Appreciate that warm intro, and that was a fantastic opening monologue too, just talking a little bit about the cloud communications universe we live in and how security lives within that world. We all know about securing our database servers and securing, some of our corporate infrastructure. And now that more and more of our communications are running through that cloud now, we thought it would be just apropos to have the company on the call today, Mitel, where we see at least, to get the stat, it's 2 billion business connections a day going through their systems, and more of those calls and those connections are going through their cloud. In fact, Mitel has the largest growing cloud UCaaS company on the market today. They are number 1 or number 2 in the market in new ads for the sheer number of seats each month worldwide. And if there's anybody who has more of an interest in securing those communications, it's them. So we're very excited to have Pedro Luna, the Senior Product Manager from Mitel, on the call today. And we're going to go through and have a conversation. And hopefully you follow along and find a lot of value in what we're going to talk about today. I know that me personally and everybody here at Telarus that works with Mitel, these are conversations that our partners are having with their clients every day. And we want to make sure that you can gather this information and use it in your arsenal of weaponry when you're talking to your clients about their cloud security. Pedro, welcome to the call, my friend.
Thank you, Patrick. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody.
Excellent. So Pedro, real fast, let's talk a little bit about security for the modern worker. When you talk about cloud communications, what we're really doing is we're taking all the communications from an on-site phone system and we're moving them to the cloud, which of course is accessible everywhere, which is one of its unique values. But when we put something in the cloud and we put it into a public arena, how is that affecting people that use it every day?
So today, I think about numbers are vary, but I think there's about 47% of folks who are reportedly using their own devices. So as they come onto their new jobs and everything, they're going to bring their own device, and they, from a security point of view, the IT groups and the IS within the companies start cringing when they see folks walking around with their own mobile phones and being able to access the different sets of tools that the companies give them. And they're constantly on the go. Yeah.
Yep, and they bring on applications that they've downloaded. They bring on everything else that could be, intertwined with the communication solutions that we're trying to provide through the cloud. But the question really is not all cloud communications are created equal, right? Different companies, like we learned in the intro, different companies secure things in different ways. And just because we know about cloud communications, there's so many flavors. There's cloud multi-tenant communications. There's cloud private tenant communications. There's lots of different things out there. So let's go ahead and start from the very beginning and talk about how we keep everything secure. Let's start with just talking about some cloud security concerns in general. What are some of the concerns you've seen, Pedro, when people come in and are considering maybe moving from a Mitel on-prem system to a Mitel cloud system? What are some of the concerns that you're hearing from those type of folks?
So some of them have to do around specifically on the cloud. One of the questions that a lot of folks ask is, how is my data kept separate from anybody being able to come into something that's sitting not in my premise? So they worry about the fact that it's not behind something that they can physically see. I think from a legacy point of view, folks are used to seeing a central office where the equipment's there and they feel comfortable because only people with badges can get in there, right? And so they worry about who can get into my data. How can a single vendor be able to adhere to regulatory requirements from HIPAA to SOC 2 on the European side of the house with GDPR? They worry about how am I going to be able to pass all of those compliances that my industry needs. The other one has to do with all the different applications that their employees use from being able to collaborate using some tools such as Slack, etc. How are they able to ensure that the data communications that their customers or their employees are sharing across the applications remain secure and not being able to be hacked by just anybody who's walking down the street? And that also goes on to the phone devices, right? The desk phones, how most folks are used to, from a legacy point of view, being able to have that hard wire that came from the wall. Now they hear, okay, well, this is going to be a different type of wiring. Where does that connection go all the way up to? And so they worry about the architecture, the underlying architecture that manages the communications that they're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I could summarize it in one word that you just mentioned, I would say the word would be control, right? When that system is in your closet, you can control it. But when now you're in a cloud that you don't own, over an internet connection that you don't control, with a bunch of different factors and variables now that you didn't used to have in the equation, a lot of people, rightly so, see some risk in that. So let's talk a little bit about why and how to best prevent things from happening in an adverse scenario in your cloud communication system. Let's talk a little bit about first, what's the process that people should go through when looking for a collaboration or UCaaS provider?
Absolutely. So I think that the best thing would be from a preventative point of view is look at your service provider. Where are they bringing in their communications? So they have a hodgepodge of different solutions from voice, from collaboration, from instant messaging, even being able to cross-collaborate from IMs to a business SMS, ensuring that you're working with the service provider that is a single platform. It's able to give you a more simplified management interface for you to be able to not just look at the feature functionality you have, but also control the end users from being able to access their features and the data that they use on a daily basis. Also being able to feel safe with regards to, by working with a single service provider, it minimizes the usage of free apps. So we talked a little bit about Slack, and there's other collaborative tools out there that your employees can just download from the web and be able to use, or from the App Store, be able to use and communicate with their peers. However, what happens when they leave the corporation? That data that they were using on their device on a free app would go with them. You have no control over that. So essentially research the different service providers, the experiences that they have with regards to breaches, on security. Make sure that you have a partnership with them, that they're able to communicate openly with you with anything that's occurred in the past. And more importantly is make sure that you have continual employee training. I know for us within Mitel, we have yearly training, and that we have to be certified with regards to how we share information. We have a clean desk policy as well, and that it's part of all that security internal to the company. And so make sure that your IS and your IT departments are in constant communications with your employees.
No, that's great. I think some of the areas when people actually go to do this research that they're going to have a particular interest in, especially when it comes to cloud communications, are things like VPN that we need to talk about, compliance, which you mentioned, data breaches, doing research and figuring out if the communications provider that you're looking at has actually had problems and how they address those problems, the data centers where their POPs are located, encryption. But I think for me, from my experience here at Telarus, the thing that most people have the most heartache with is just the multi-tenant. Like, there are other companies on this virtual machine that are running processes in parallel to me. What's to make sure that people don't cross into my swim lane and mess with my stuff? So talk a little bit about what you've seen at Mitel in terms of the areas where your potential customers might be asking you a lot of questions that you need to know about.
Certainly. So one of the applications that we have on our solution has to do with a soft client, which you can run on your desktop, you can run on your mobile device as well. So it runs in conjunction with your desk phone. One of the first questions that our customer asks is like, how am I going to access that information? Because I'm walking around the city on my LTE or my Wi-Fi. Do I need to leave the connectivity open? So from our point of view, we've actually embedded a VPN tunnel within the applications to make sure that those communications are secure. So as customers, you should be able to talk with the architects, the software architects, or even the product managers and ask them. It's like, how are my devices communicating back to the cloud? Is it on an open network? Is it something that's easily breached? So for us, we use VPN within the soft client itself. Also from the multi-tenant perspective that you mentioned, Patrick, that's a question that comes up often. So that's where you have meetings with your service provider. You'll look at the architecture that should be able to sit with you and say, okay, this is how the solution is architected. This is how we prevent each tenant from cross-pollinating one another. And so those are a part of the initial research that we were talking about and being able to communicate with your vendor. From an encryption point of view, one of the questions that come up as well is what level of encryption do the devices have? So as you're talking with your service provider, the IP phones that you're using should have a fairly high level of encryption embedded into not just the voice, but also the numbers that you're sending. And that encryption should be all across the platform, from your desk phones to your mobile devices to how you're accessing the provisioning data on the portal. So encryption is quite important in that.
Excellent. Well, for me, when we're talking about UCaaS and the security that needs to happen with it, a lot of times there are myths that exist out in the customer's mind, out in the market. Let's talk about some of those myths real fast and dispel them. And the first myth that I frequently hear is that the cloud isn't as secure as an on-premise. Talk to me a little bit about how that's not true.
So one of the key things for us from a Mitel perspective is working with our partners that provide our data center infrastructure for us. More often than not, they have more stringent access into those rooms, those closets, because they have to have, that's part of their business. They have to be able to provide a secure closet for all the different equipment from the different vendors to reside there. So from a security perspective, it's all part of what they do on a day-to-day basis. From a premise, you have it in your own specific closet, but if you have people coming in to service it or whatever, they're all coming in, and you might have employees who leave and still have potential access to that functionality or to that architecture. But by having it on the cloud, your service provider is the one that controls all that. And a lot of times, for instance, for us, we have to go through certification of security, for example, for SOC 2 from a financial perspective, for HIPAA from a healthcare perspective, and for our EU customers for GDPR. We have to go through rigorous certification to ensure that that data is protected and the equipment is protected from any sort of breaches.
Excellent. And then, there's just this myth that geography protects your data. The fact that your servers are in your office isn't that secure when you look at, like you said, like these huge data centers and even the big cloud providers. Good luck getting into a Google facility, right? The second thing I hear is that users are more secure working in an office than they are at home or some other remote location. Again, I don't think geography brings security. I think the way the system is architected, I think, is where the security lies. Is that accurate?
That is accurate, and I think for me specifically, I'm a teleworker for Mitel. So I go into the office a couple of days a week, but most of the time I'm working from my home office. But one of the things that I had to go through initially was, like I mentioned earlier, go through a rigorous security certification. But also the equipment that I use is something that Mitel's provided. So from a company perspective, your IT or your IS department has absolute control on what the employee is able to access and use. So it would be the same setup that they have at the office, except from a remote location.
Excellent. And then also there's a myth, hey, if the software that I'm running is compliant, my entire company is compliant. Tell us why that's just not true either.
Well, and I think it's mostly from where is that software coming from, right? So while a specific software vendor might say, yeah, we're compliant with a specific security requirement, it may be running on different servers. So it might be running on servers that have not gone through the rigorous testing to receive that compliance sticker. And so that's where you as a customer would have to ensure that each piece of equipment that you're running on, that your software is running on, has gone through those tests. By going through a company such as Mitel or a different cloud provider, when they tell you we are certified for HIPAA, SOC 2, or GDPR, they actually have gone through the appropriate channels with the appropriate government agencies to ensure that those tests have been passed. So the compliancy is more assured when you go through a service provider, because you know that they've spent the time and effort and money to receive that compliancy.
Excellent. And last but not least, let's just talk about the debunking the myth of multi-tenant not being as secure as multi-instance. If there is one virtual machine in the cloud that's supporting 100 different instances of the software, as opposed to one VM supporting one instance of the program and every single customer having their own VM, explain to me how those are equally secure, because I think they are. A lot of people think they're not.
So I think more than anything is the fact that you've partitioned the instance. So by partitioning the instance for a specific customer, you're essentially providing them through VMware the ability to have their own virtual server. So even though it's riding or residing in the same cloud as another competitor, if you would, of the industry that you're coming from, you have your own virtualized machine and your own virtualized environment where you have your X number of employees working from. So for all intents and purposes, you have a slice of the solution that's running on the cloud.
Excellent. So I think during the course of this, if you're sitting in the audience, you should be asking yourself, how do you provide the same level of security in the cloud as on-premise? You should be asking where the data is stored. You should be thinking about how compliant is the system. So let's go ahead and get into some nitty-gritty details on the actual 5 questions that you should be asking. Question number 1, Pedro.
So what are the first questions that you should ask? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, what infrastructure is your system hosted on? What cloud provider are you working with? Why is that? Tell us why that's important.
So from a hosting perspective, it's important because of the fact that you want to know where your service provider is running their cloud infrastructure. There's different data center vendors across the world, and specifically here in the U.S. as well, obviously. But you want to ask them, where are you hosting it? What sort of infrastructure do you have? Are you working with a third party? So for us, our most compliant solution, our HIPAA compliance and our SOC 2 compliancy, we're working with Google. And we found that as a service provider for us, the data center infrastructure that is there, it gives us the power and the tools that are necessary to ensure that the infrastructure stays safe, that the access to those resources or to that software or hardware architecture is controlled by somebody that we truly trust. And we essentially give the keys to the experts to be able to drive that for us.
Yeah, that was a relatively recent move by you guys. Is that right? The move to the Google Cloud?
That's correct. So we actually announced it last week as part of the Google Next event. It's something that we've been working with them for a while, obviously testing and ensuring that we felt secure and safe in the infrastructure that we were using before we actually made the announcement. So once we went through the different certifications that we needed Google to go through and as well as our hardware, we felt comfortable enough to announce that.
That's fantastic. In fact, there are actually a lot of your new, in fact, I think all of your new customers that have been provisioned onto the Mitel Cloud system have been on Google, even as recently as a few months ago. So everyone going forward is going on the Google Cloud. And talking to Rich McBee, the CEO of Mitel, just last week at Channel Partner Show, he was telling me we're not 5 nines, we're 6 nines. He goes, actually, we don't know how many nines we are because we haven't had an outage. So we're kind of 100% up because Google is that robust. So I think that was a tremendous move on your part, both in terms of the compliance and the protection and the security, but also just in terms of performance. So that seems to be a great thing. Let's get to question 2. How do you ensure security for those people who are working at home, those remote workers?
So from a remote worker's perspective, we want to make sure that as a customer, you look at what the provider offers for you. So what else are they bringing onto the table? What sort of solutions and compliancy they're bringing? So I've been harping about our HIPAA and SOC 2 compliance. How should that make you feel comfortable? I mean, those are just acronyms. Well, it has to do with the fact that we have to handle sensitive data just like our customers do, and they have to make sure that they trust us with that data and how that's being handled. So make sure that also you have, as I mentioned about our mobility client, the VPN client is built in so that it minimizes the user accountability. So you don't have to worry about, oh, did they launch a VPN client? Did they remember to do that for us? No, it's already in there. So as the communication tool is launched, it's already running over a secure tunnel, and it's also running over a secure RTP packet to ensure that your voice traffic is encrypted, and there's no eavesdropping that is coming from folks who may be scanning the network that the end user is working through. Also making sure that the encryption is ensured not only on the mobile devices or your desktops, but also on your web clients, on your provisioning clients, on your portals. You have to make sure that as you talk with your service providers, they show you what encryption is being done and what sort of certificates are being connected for you to be able to provision your end users and access the data that you have online.
Excellent. So just in terms of defining some of those things you just used, you talked about encryption, you talked about HTTPS protocol, which is, just like on the web when you're looking at a secure HTTPS, website. The thing for me that really stuck out though is secure RTP or SRTP as some people call it, which is the protocol to ensure that data is being transmitted and encrypted in real time. So the people that are working remotely, they don't necessarily have to go out and buy a VPN in order to use this, the Mitel solution, right? It's got built-in RTP and VPN in it. Pedro, are you there?
I am. I lost voice for a second. I'm not sure what happened.
No worries. No.
So if you could repeat, if you could repeat the question if you had one, because I literally started panicking because I lost you for a second.
No question. So just talking about the security for people who work at home, the secure RTP and the encryption that happens. Talk a little bit about the built-in VPN. So users at home, in the past, they would have to open their computer, set up a VPN connection, and do a bunch of stuff prior to actually making transactions. If they've got a phone at home and it's part of the Mitel cloud, talk to us a little bit about how that's built into the actual phone and the network.
So from a phone perspective, the desk phone itself, we're obviously that's connected directly into our solution, and there's no need for a VPN client to be running in there because that is managed by our SBCs, our session border controllers. Now, from a mobile device itself, the mobile client itself, we have embedded into the solution the handshaking functionality to be able to connect back to our server. So from the mobile client, there's the underlying security software that essentially calls home back to the server, and it secures the connection to ensure that you're using a secure tunnel. So, for example, on my laptop, I have if I need to access a specific area of work from an engineering perspective, I have to launch a VPN client for that. If I'm running it if I'm running the desktop client on my Mac, that itself also has that client embedded in there, so that I don't have to have multiple VPN clients running. It doesn't matter on what type of connection I am. I'm able to communicate that way.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I don't think many people in our audience know. I didn't know about the virtual VPN that's built into the mobile client. So basically, anytime you're accessing anything Mitel related, what you're actually doing is kind of launching a virtual MPLS network. So everything stays secure end to end.
Correct. That is correct. So we essentially, from our perspective, we ensure that for our customers' sake, it's all secured, encrypted, and there's no ability to be breached.
Fantastic. Great. Let's get to question number 3. Is your solution built in-house? Meaning, is the provider that you're using owners of the code that is controlling the communication experience? Or are you, talking to a provider that may be, having a contractual relationship with a third-party platform, and they're kind of layering their own feature functionality on top of? Talk about why that's important, an in-house solution versus a outsourced solution.
Absolutely. So from an end-to-end perspective, your service provider would have more control over both the software and the hardware. So what that means is, as they do the development in-house, they don't have to worry about having to do any sort of integration with the third party because of the fact that everything's doing from one engineering department to the other. When you bring in service providers who are bringing in solutions from a third party, you have to essentially trust them to ensure that they have gone through the specific test cases and QA to certify that it's all secure. When it's all done in-house, when it's all done from a single point of view, the service provider essentially own all the aspects of the solution, from the laptop, from the collaborative tools that they bring on board, from the web access to your portal, to the mobile devices and what sort of collaborative tools you have on the mobile device. Your service provider, it's more secure if they are able to provide an end-to-end solution for you.
Right. Now, just to be clear, we're not talking about third-party integrations with outside applications, right, like Salesforce.com and QuickBooks and things of that nature. We're talking about internal to the actual communication solution being all under one umbrella, correct?
Correct, versus having somebody who's might be a third party bringing in engineering resources to do the coding. So as they outsourcing the development to a different different company, then you start exposing some of the underlying infrastructure as a service provider. By having everything built in-house, then you have more control over who has access to not just the data of the customer, but also the software development that is being done underneath.
Right. Talk to us a little bit real fast just about third-party applications. So say someone wants to marry their Mitel with Salesforce.com, which is where their data lives. Tell us a little bit about what people can be doing to make sure that data is secure, because now that data is literally living in two systems. In fact, in some cases, you can actually launch Mitel telephony services from actually inside your Salesforce instance. And the dividing lines kind of blur a little bit of where the data is and who's in control of securing it.
That's correct. And so, you're right, Patrick, in that we do have an API that allows our solution to have a voice element to Salesforce.com. And the way that you as a customer should be able to feel safe and secure is you ask your service provider, what is the relationship between you and that third party, in this instance, Salesforce.com. So what we've done is we've partnered with Salesforce.com to ensure that we have the ability to embed our API into the solution to be able to drive the voice and be able to enable our end users access to their customer data that they have in there. Now, we don't have the ability to obviously pool the data that it's hosted in there, so that Salesforce.com continues to host that. What we've done is we have embedded a way for them to input the data into SFDC a lot smoother within the same web environment, rather than having to jump around from one device to another.
Perfect. Excellently done. Let's get to question number 4 before we run out of time. When things go wrong or there might be a breach or something may be amiss, how do you monitor your system? What are the best ways to do that?
So from obviously you want your service provider to have a great expert network operations center in that they have the right tools to be able to drive this. You want to make sure that from a NOC perspective, that is a location where continual monitoring of your telecommunications network occurs. So make sure that it's proactive monitoring. So one of the things that we have been able to do with the move to Google Cloud Platform is ensuring that we're able to use and take advantage of the access to their technology stacks information, and that gives us a lot of analytics and for our network engineers and our support engineers to become more proactive rather than reactive. So what that means is, as they're looking at the analytic tools that are coming into the NOC, they can see where the data performance is, or the network performance is happening, how your system is performing as well, and they have the ability to monitor it and be able to take the lead in case something's happening with the network to ensure that we are able to control any potential gaps in the network delivery or on the voice delivery as well. You also want to make sure that they have the ability to support you, whether that's done in-house or is it being outsourced somewhere outside of the region that you currently live at. For example, for us, we have NOC centers in North America and in Europe as well to make sure that we are able to support our customers 24/7. So regardless of where they're located, make sure that your service provider has the ability to do that. And you also want to make sure that you ask them, what sort of tools and analytics are you leveraging to stay ahead of the curve? And so they should be able to be open and share with you a lot of the tools that they use to help you have a more successful day-to-day operations.
That's right. Now, Pedro, you're talking about network monitoring, and you're talking about everything inside the voice network. To get into that voice network, you need an external network, right? You need an internet service provider in addition to a communication service provider. Talk to us just for a quick second a little bit about the importance of making sure those internet service providers maintain their levels of service that they've committed to so that this whole experience doesn't get wrecked.
And that's actually a very important partnership, Patrick, in that in order for your service provider to be able to deliver the voice and the collaboration and instant messaging solutions to you, they have to make sure that you have a good partner from a data provider so that you have access to the voice, to the data, to the instant messaging communications. But it's also important to make sure that the service provider that you're working with has the ability to partner with them so that they have a full monitoring capability of the entire network. So for example, for us, we have the ability to monitor the network from the inside. So our network operations centers has the ability, our engineers have the ability to look at the network hiccups and bandwidth issues that might occur. But from the edge, make sure that you have a good partner, or your service provider has a good partner that's working to be able to monitor the edge. I know we partner with you guys at Telarus to be able to help us monitor at the edge to ensure that there is no network drops in between the communications that we're delivering for our customers.
Yeah, that's great. And that's one of the reasons why we purchased a network monitoring company 3 years ago, is because we saw that as the early adopters came into over-the-top UCaaS, what would happen is, there would be intermittent outages, and the service provider would say, hey, our NOC is solid, everything is solid, and the internet service provider would say, hey, our network is solid, contact the service provider, and they would just point fingers at each other. I think those days are more in our rearview mirror than they are out the front of the hood. But just having those tools in place to make sure that those circuits stay up, and then also just having proactive mechanisms to open up trouble tickets and get those circuits back working are super important. And as things move to the cloud, the need for that resilient network, which is really based off of best effort service, which is ironic. But SD-WAN and other technologies have really helped people fortify those networks, and at the same time help keeping them secure just with their built-in VNF and other firewall features that a lot of those SD-WAN appliances come with. So very, very glad you had a chance to talk to us about that, Pedro. And now let's go ahead and have the big finish with the last question. How do I get informed of any issues? Because you know what? This is life, not perfect. When something happens, what's going to happen next?
Absolutely. So the key is proactive communications. When you go with the service provider, it should be viewed more as a partnership rather than a customer and provider perspective. They should be able to alert you when a problem arises. How did they provide that information to you? Can you select a preferred method of communications? Top providers will have multiple options, whether it's over a web portal that communicates it, fires off an email, they can send you a text, they can give you a phone call. But the key is transparency and that partnership that should be there from a service provider to customer perspective. And the key on the transparency, is there a public site for you to be able to access that information? Do you have to jump through hoops, VPN, et cetera, to get there? Or is it something that it's, for us, we call it a trust site, where our customers have the ability to jump in there and look at our network at any point in time, and they should be able to see what's up and what's down throughout the network rather than just on their own environment. And more importantly, obviously, are they available 24/7, 365? Because if your service provider is only available on working days, then that might be a company that you might want to kind of walk away from.
No, absolutely. Well, Pedro, I just want to thank you so much for your time today, for walking us through those 5 key questions that people should be asking. For me, the key takeaway today are 3 things. Number 1, like you said, do your research, ask the questions. Number 2, find a single reliable provider that can control the end-to-end solution and be responsible if something goes wrong. And then lastly, provide continual employee training to prevent attacks, because no matter how well fortified your technology is, when human beings aren't following policy and aren't doing the right things, security issues always rear their ugly head. So with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude this presentation. But before we do that, Pedro, I want you just to give us the 2-minute version. You've done a really good job of really sticking to the key points of agnostic questions that people should be asking, things people should be thinking of. Tell us a little bit about how Mitel Cloud Solutions fits into all of these 5 questions that we've been asking.
Absolutely. So from right off the bat, is Mitel's been around for a while, and from a historical point of view, we did a great job of providing the legacy communications, on-prem communications, for many, many, many years. And we've used that same DNA, for lack of a better term, that we've learned through the different lessons of the years to implement our cloud infrastructure, our cloud portfolio. So the same expertise that was there in the early days, that same lessons have been applied onto cloud to ensure that not only do we provide the voice communications, but we provide secure and reliable communications through migrating them over to the cloud. So we have that expertise already. We have been dedicated to delivering great customer experiences. So we have partnerships with our customers through what we call our customer success managers. So the success of our team is dependent upon the success of that experience that our customer has by using our solution. The ease of use, making sure that the vendor that you're going with has a telecom background. It's not necessarily just a data provider, but they have had the ability to enable you to use everything in a more smooth and easier manner. Make sure that by having a tool that is easy to use, you have more time that you can spend on generating or creating other strategic initiatives for your business. And more importantly, we have a service reliability and security, and now very proud of being built on top of Google Cloud for delivering our services.
That's fine. And then one point I would even like to add myself, in that most people, when they hear the word Mitel, they think about premise-based solutions. And now we're here talking about Mitel is provisioned in the Google Cloud. You're adding more cloud seats than anybody else in the world. And I would dare venture to say in the UCaaS world, I don't think anyone understands that the customer's path from on-prem to cloud like you guys do. Really, it's unprecedented. The larger providers in UCaaS were born in the cloud UCaaS. They've never been in the hardware world. They don't know the kind of pains or experiences that those customers have gone through and why they may like and be really attached to their on-premise phone system, and what real key benefits people are going to leverage by moving to the cloud. And I think that Mitel sits in a unique position to really help customers have those hard conversations, because ultimately, at the end of the day, it's going cloud. If you're going to become reliant, almost like a drug addict, on the type of solutions, and I always tell people it's like taking a utility and turning it into a competitive weapon for your business. Customer engagement in the future is going to rely on you having everything in the cloud, because the clouds are going to talk to their cloud, who's going to talk to other clouds that they're using, and all the clouds are going to talk together, and we're going to have so much information share going on, and that just can't happen on-prem. And again, Mitel, I think, sits in the catbird seat up in the eagle's nest, watching this transition happen. In fact, even forcing the transition to happen.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Well, that concludes our time. Pedro, I would just like to thank you so much for your time. With the time we have left, let's go ahead and turn it back over to Eric and open up to Q&A.
Wonderful, gentlemen. Thank you. Some fantastic insight and information there. For those of you who haven't gotten your questions into us, you have an interface on your screens. Keep them coming. We do have some great ones already in. So let's get started with those. And I think either or both of you who want to weigh in on any of these questions, I'd love to hear from both of you. Does greater security have an impact on the performance of your communications apps?
So I'll start it off, and Patrick, you can follow it up as well. It shouldn't. Greater security should be part of the solution. It should be something that you provide for your end user. You want to make sure that it's embedded in there. The performance of the applications should be able to continue to operate and work the same way, and it should be a smooth performance for the end user, to where they don't even recognize that they're going over a secure versus an insecure connection.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think the answer, very clearly is it shouldn't. Whenever you encrypt things, what you do is you create, greater bandwidth and overhead, because you're using more bandwidth to encrypt and secure. Then you have encryption and decryption. And so there's a possibility of delay, but architected correctly, again, for the human ear and the amount of tolerance that we have in our technology, communication fidelity, there should be no degradation at all. You're right.
Excellent. Thank you. So you guys have talked about Google Cloud a couple of times. What makes Google Cloud better than some of the other providers out there? And obviously there are some very well-known and respected cloud providers out there. And what is the impact of those differences to the customer?
So from my point of view, there's a couple. So reliability. Google is responsible for so much traffic across the world that goes through the data centers. Standardization. So each data center looks identical to the other, which allows them to provide larger data pipes, which in turn bring down the latency that our tools and our customers are having to go through to receive greater performance. And for us is network tools. The ability to leverage the tools that Google has been using for years as part of our solution for being able to provide better analytics, better performance information for our customers.
Yeah, I totally agree. Here at Telarus, I mean, we're not a communication provider per se. We, in full disclosure, use Microsoft Azure because it has built into it, it's SQL and web server type of stuff. You also have AWS that's very good at workloads. And like Pedro just said, Google is really known for reliability, security, and speed. And if you're a communication provider, having the ability to process the quantity of phone calls in a very fast and very robust environment really is optimal for communication rollouts. Great question.
Gentlemen, thank you, gentlemen. So a little bit earlier in your presentations, you were talking about SRTP and private networks. Is SRTP as safe as a private network?
So from SRTP by definition is a way to provide a secure real-time protocol, and it's a protocol that's been around for years actually. From the very early days of SIP communications when they're coming on board, all the early service providers that embraced SIP were able to have that as a delivery method for voice. It's gone through many different iterations of ensuring that it's been secured and make sure that it's free from being able to be sniffed. So from my point of view, yes, and it's gone through rigorous usage through decades now that it's been around.
Great. Thanks, Pedro. Thanks, Pedro. So obviously the focus of today's conversation has been largely on communications, cloud communication services, but businesses are using the cloud for so many different applications. And, as they say, you're only as secure or you're only as safe as your weakest link. How many of these, can most of these suggestions, types of questions be applied to other cloud services as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think from regardless of which services you're receiving from the cloud, whether it's data storage, whether it's the ability to secure passwords, etc., you want to make sure that you do your research on that vendor to make sure that your data is being kept away from being easily hacked.
Yeah, and I agree, but I think that there's two layers of security. There's the layer of security that the global infrastructure provider can provide you, like a Google Cloud in general, but then there's also the level of security that you yourself as a company are setting up and maintaining, because Google could be secure as Fort Knox, but if someone gets your password and gets into your Google account, guess what? You're compromised. So there's nothing Google can do to help you at that point. And so it's a two-layer. Security in every conversation we have here at Telarus, security is always like an onion. There's 7 or 8 layers, but you want to make sure that at least the infrastructure layer that you're using is secure, because there's nothing you can do about that. That's a decision you make of which provider to put your data in, and you're only as going to be as secure as they are. But I think in most cases, most companies are more vulnerable between their own protocols and their own human beings that are not following the proper protocols than the actual infrastructure itself. But you know what? It's like you just said, it's as secure or insecure as your weakest link. And typically the infrastructure isn't a weak link. Usually it's you.
And thank you, Patrick. You kind of answered the last question I was going to ask, which was really, there are lots of things that providers can do, but some of that security requirement rests on the part of the business itself as well. So thank you for addressing that already. That really does take us to the end of the time that we have for questions today. If there are additional questions still coming in, they will all have been archived, and I know that the teams at Mitel and will get back to those, respond to those offline following today's event. And again, if you have additional questions, contact information will be available in a follow-up email. And certainly if you have colleagues who weren't able to join us live today, you'll also be getting details on the archived version of today's event. So with that, a warm thank you to both Patrick and Pedro for spending their time with us today. And thank you to everybody in our audience for taking time out of your busy days. With that, we are at the end of our session today. Have a wonderful afternoon.